In what college classes have you run into the most pretentious people? Film studies, oh my god. I took it as an elective, and it was so unbearable. I ended up failing because I spent so much time seething instead of working. Chose another elective when came the time to make up the credit. I couldn't stand taking it again. Intro film classes are the worst because every kid in there thinks his or her approach to filmmaking is gonna make them the next Goddard or Bergman, when really the most they'll ever do is maybe direct commercials or not break into the industry at all. Psychology and philosophy. Some students who have taken one psych class will condescendingly diagnose you, themselves, passing traffic, inanimate objects. Some students who've taken one philosophy class will condescendingly name drop Kierkegaard and argue semantics to tell you you're wrong. I knew a psych major once. According to his analysis, it was my fear of commitment that kept me from becoming his girlfriend. I didn't notice any class in particular, but I did notice that the more advanced the class, the more elitist students got. Sure, you're only in calculus? Take advanced triargonic calculus 9000, then we'll talk. Anything pre-med. You've never seen such butt kissing. It's really sad to see them all figuratively masturbate the professor for a chance at a letter of recommendation. When you're a course instructor or TE, you get to see that the butt kissing morphs into relentless grade grubbing in non-health sciences courses. If I get one more email from a 19-year-old informing me that they are going to medical school and I need to boost their grade on the assignment they half-assed. For me, it's been fellow electrical engineers. A lot of them have decided that every other major is beneath them and do not think highly of what they consider lower tier engineering majors. Some of the political science, physics, and math majors I know are similar. I've taken a few arts related classes, and those can really vary. The worst was by far theater, since the people in there think they're doing the hardest work on the planet and are on a pedestal above everyone else. It's a lot of inflated egos. Conversely, dance class was a lot of fun, although it might depend on the instructor. Mine was really laid back and encouraging. Just a bunch of stretching and jumping and getting in tune with your body, and nobody cares how awkward it looks. I took a ballet class for non-dance majors and it was the most fun I've ever had in a class. The teacher was cool because she knew we weren't striving to be professionals, so she made it more educational and less strict, which fostered an atmosphere where we didn't have to be self-conscious and could just try without the fear of looking goofy. Music majors. I'm not sure pretentious is the right word. Sheltered, unhealthily unbalanced, with an unjustified sense of entitlement. Okay, maybe pretentious was the right word. I considered music my freshman year. I came from a musical family and was in band and choir in high school. So I took some music theory and was in college choir. A big part of why I didn't continue down that path was I just kept thinking this really isn't my crowd. I might consider going to your college then. My music department is filled with uncaring and enthusiastic frickheads. 90% of the department is music tech. If I heard squoo one more time in performance class, I might actually throw my guitar at someone. Any class at Fit in Manhattan, the outfits people would show up to class in are ridiculous. Imagine an entry-level intro to 21st century fashion with people showing up in outfits straight off the runway. Runway outfits are supposed to be adapted and made practical for everyday use. Picture someone showing up in Victoria's Secret outfit. Okay, not crazy. However, they would go as far as including the actual angel wings as well. Those were not for sale or for use. I guess they thought this was fashionable. Fit, epicenter of the hot crazy scale. Bookmaking. I took this art class as a non-major and there was a girl who would artsplain how to do projects to me and my friend like we hadn't been given the exact same instruction as her. I think I can handle cutting pieces of paper to given measurements and gluing them. She was practicing her kindergarten teacher skills on you and you never found out. Almost any class during my MBA, especially as someone coming from undergrad engineering courses. Total culture shock. And while the pretentious people were the exception and not the rule for the most part, the butt kissery and tossing around of business buzzwords almost made me sick sometimes. The funniest part would be when you had a conversation with one of these people and asked them a few questions about the topic and then realized that most of the time they had no idea what the frick they were talking about. It was all an act, like a performance they would put on for the professors in the class that had no real substance. And unfortunately it's these type A balls artists who end up acting their way into C-suite positions later on in life. It's all a joke really. The acting part is basically rewarded in business too, unlike in most other fields. Better balls artist equals master dinero. Unexpectedly, creative writing. I had a couple of professors, along with their loyal band of underclassmen, who preached this idea that creative non-fiction and poetry were the highest forms of writing. Anything with fantasy, science fiction or absurdist elements was somehow less valuable, no matter how well written it was. Naturally, I took every opportunity I could to annoy them with stories about sentient armchairs, medical mysteries caused by fairies, and orcish dentists. Now I want to read that story. Please tell me you wrote one with all three. I must also confess that I read that as ostrich dentists would still read. It's not the worst by any standards, but I was shocked at how many buttholes major in veterinary. I wanted to be a vet because I love animals and people who love them too, but a staggering amount were in it because they hated people, because apparently dogs take themselves to the vet. Who knew? There were kind and cool students, sure, but a lot of them were daddy's girls who had no concept of the real world and would just be. And the teachers were absolutely the most burned out, bitter people I'd ever met. They all seemed to hate people. I realized they probably had a lifetime of bad experiences behind them to fuel that hatred. But geez, they has to be good, right? Playwriting. I was one of those pretentious buttholes until my professor basically beat that out of me. Half the playwrights just enjoy writing, but there are those crappy few who will tell you why their expressionist retelling of a Shakespearean melodrama through a Breton PowerPoint presentation is the highest form of art ever created. Engineering. Pretentious and the I don't know how to act normally with others, but god dang I'm going to let everyone know how much smarter I am because of my major. So in high school I was the loudmouth know-it-all in history class. By the time I got to university I stopped caring as much and kept my mouth shut, but there was this one pretentious guy in some of my more narrow classes who wouldn't keep his mouth shut, laughing at students who asked questions, correcting professors under his breath, then giving off a chuckle and a head shake when in reality it was just a prof who spoke English as a second language and made an honest mistake. I took a semester of Mandarin Chinese in college and we had a kid who would do stuff like that. The best was he was wrong a lot. I taught lower level college courses for 3 years. Aside from philosophy and religion courses, 100 level writing and rhetoric classes were the worst. Tons of freshmen who had mastered the 5-paragraph argumentative essay, intro, argument, counter-argument, response to counter-argument, conclusion, in high school without ever learning how to actually construct an enthymeme, develop evidence, or think critically. They were always horrified and self-righteous when their first essay came back with poor marks. Plus there would always be a few students who were planning on going into a career where they wouldn't need to write. Spoiler, if you are in college, you're going to need to know how to write and properly form arguments. I love when engineers get out of college and realize that have to write something. It is very amusing for me. Intro programming classes. There are script kiddies acting like they can hack into the CIA because they already know how to ask the user for an input. Business 101. There was a group project with 3 or 4 people and when I brought in my part the other B I worked with said don't worry I already did the whole project. I'm not willing to risk my 4.0 GPA. That is not pretentious. That is your new best friend. Source: I'm business student. Computer science. Every single person thought they were the next Bill Gates and Steve Jobs and could code full-fledged games and software while in ComC 101. My ComC class was the opposite. Either it works but IDKY or it doesn't work and IDKY. Energy in the 21st century and environmental stewardship. In both classes the teachers had to repeatedly defend scientific evidence that global warming is real and needs our attention. At the end of each class there were still students that said, I guess climate change is real, but ultimately God will take care of it. I was just blown away by this. Someone recognizes a problem but expects God to just come and magically fix it. All of the programs people listed, philosophy, film studies, creative writing, psychology, also tend to have a lot of in-class discussion. I think this is telling because in other fields not listed here, math, comp sci, etc., may be less discussion driven and in turn given students fewer chances to reveal your negative personality traits. There is a chance that people in other programs also have these tendencies. Most young people do. It's just that there are fewer opportunities for them to display them in courses with less constant group interaction. Went to a small private Christian college, and by far the pastoral ministry majors were the absolute most uppity, pretentious, and full of themselves. I was housemates with one for a year, and he always had to be right about everything. Friend of mine, now wife, was a child of a pastor of a very small church, had a debate with him about church finances and how running a church is almost like running a small business. Her point was that it would be valuable for a minister to have an understanding of small non-profit business principles because you can't guarantee you'll have someone to handle the business. After presenting case-specific evidence, the guy's only response was to look at her with a pretentious smirk and say, well, I would say that's a worldly view. To these people, worldly is an insult. It means you're less than they are, and for females equates to calling her a s. I'm a sociology student, and while I love it, holy crap, some of these people are so impressed with themselves. The worst was probably wealth, power and inequality. The cluelessness, hypocrisy and entitlement was astounding, but it was paired with such self-assuredness. There's this one kid in my intro sociology class that talks in a fake British accent and tries really hard to sound smart. Every time he opens his mouth I want to start crying. For me it was macroeconomics. Microeconomics doesn't seem to challenge a person's political beliefs, but macro definitely does. I had one class in comparative economic systems that was very civil and open-minded, but I had two other macro classes that seemed to attract people who wanted to argue with the professors, mostly libertarians or Ron Paul voters who talked a lot more than they listened. This makes me glad my school allows me to test out of these classes via CLEP. Haven't taken the course myself, but I once got into an argument about police violence with someone whose only justification was pretentiously saying I've taken a criminal justice class. It suffices to say the class is pandering to the kinds of people who equate a college class with a law degree. I've no desire to be anywhere near it. Physics majors at my college are the worst. They constantly have a holier-than-thou attitude and a need to express the elegance of their field. There's a reason we have them their own building so we never have to interact with them. They always think that just because they have an opinion on something, even if they have no idea what they are talking about, it's valid because of their inherent understanding of everything because they are smarter than everyone else. I am aware that not all physicists are like this and I'm not condemning the field as a whole. There's a reason we have them their own building so we never have to interact with them. Freaking savage. No one has said sociology. Sociology. You read one small study about something as intricate as human behavior and you think you have the authority to pass judgment about any group of people as a whole? Cool. Basically any English class. I'm an English major so I'm used to it. But oh my gosh if I hear the word subtext one more time. Spanish. Just because you're Hispanic and know Spanish doesn't mean you get to be an but. Source. I'm Mexican that learned Spanish through the school system instead of parents. Oh man. I was just thinking about this. Every major has their own snobs I'd say. I can't speak for other majors, though I can try and imagine. But in journalism, it's the people who are news junkies. They read the New York Times, Washington Post, the New Yorker, the Atlantic, Gately's, Hunter S. Thompson, etc. and just act like they've transcended the rest of us. There's nothing wrong with any of those outlets or authors. I have read all of the above, and they typically make you a better informed citizen or thinker, but sometimes they can be used as a pulpit to spit on the unwashed masses from. Sips black coffee and shuffles my copy of The Atlantic on my desk, which smells of old vinyl and sweet tube amps. I can't believe people can lack self-awareness to such a degree. Hypocrites. Others have said it, and I'll reiterate. philosophy, hands down. No other group are more likely to raise their hands and waste the rest of our collective time with a counter-argument to the prof that they'll admit they haven't thought through yet, or ask a question that just occurs to them, even though they haven't done the reading. So this may have been answered. FFS. Just shut up. You're not as smart as you think you are, and you're, almost as a rule, insufferably pedantic and unwarranted in your snobbery. Women's Studies. Needed an easy elective. To finish my second year requirements, never met as many bitter people in one room. Surprisingly, when I started looking into film technician classes, production crew, lighting, camera operators, editors, etc., I've been through a few majors not knowing what I want in life. But this major was seriously the worst. Only one I dropped primarily because of the type of students and teachers, and thus those working in the industry. It became a major competition for who got to put tape on the floor for what production. I saw famous so and so from 300 feet away, and so I am totally amazing. A lot of that, and a lot of quid pro quo and various other favors for jobs. Plus everyone and their mother worked on their own indie films, so you had to be in their exclusive clubs to break it big with them despite nobody really finishing the projects they start. The other thing was the backstabbing. Boy, will people crap talk your ability to set up lights so that they can steal your job. I think the problem was how few jobs there are and how far between they are for the amount of people trying to get in. I have no problem striving to get ahead, but every day was miserable and I really didn't feel like sleeping with the instructors to get ahead. I'm sure it's better in much larger movie areas where there are more jobs, but at least where I am it was crazy. Western philosophy and, though I didn't take it, psych. Both produced the most pretentious, stuck up, holier than thou, pseudo world weary edgelords you've ever seen. And I'm 34. So, this was over 14 years ago. In telling you, these were the fricking proto-hipsters. I agree with psychology and philosophy as being hubs for these people, but I'd add sociology to the top of the list, mostly for what it's transformed into in the past 5 years. It takes a very special brand of arrogance to believe people who disagree with you and have read all the same texts are uninformed or need to be educated for simply not regurgitating the same bad ideas. Political science. However, watching professors correct pretentious people in policy classes almost makes it worth it. Almost everyone in mass communication, especially film and broadcast communication, anyone who's not rich, or at least upper middle class, outgoing, sufficiently attractive, and has little to no connections in the media and entertainment industry, would not have survived mass comm. And the professors, with some exceptions, are either hard butt or too relaxed. Popularity and connections is everything in that place, and since I had none, I was under the radar for most of the time. Any sort of cultural women's intersectional studies classes, you know, the typical SJW courses. I had to take 1 or 2 of them as prereqs for my major, and it's as frustrating an experience as you'd imagine. I don't know if the people in it necessarily count as pretentious, but it was like having an unpleasant woman attempting to recruit people to her contentious, identity and blame-based worldview before our very eyes, and a surprising amount of people would just go along with it. Any social science, gender studies, women's studies, black studies, etc. It's all a lot of pretend smart people sniffing each other's farts about some balls. Philosophy and ethics. Easy. What a bunch of pseudo-intelligent, elitist shats. Easily the most irritating classes I've ever taken. Yep. There was one dude in a bioethics class that I took who was exactly what you describe. At my college, it didn't matter what course, but if a professor touched on epistemology in any way, whether they used that term or not, and caused students to question how they know what they know for the first time, they immediately became the most annoying students on campus. For years I thought one particular professor had to have been pretentious because his students were the most annoying. When I finally talked to him, it turns out he was a really likable and humble guy. He really earned his students' trust when he delivered that series of lectures, and they bought it. They just didn't know how to talk about it yet. Therefore, they annoyed the living daylights out of anyone within earshot. That prof and I are now friends, and I go to him for advice regularly. I just make sure that I don't inflict it on others. I really have no qualms, but my creative writing professor really has it out for this one kid that sits next to me. She calls on him endlessly when poetry or specific people come up. Any film watching filmmaking class will have pretentious students. I just want to do audio, but everything is film centered and mandated. Film screening classes are endless. Italian society and film was probably my worst class ever though. A history class based solely on a dry textbook and poorly subbed Italian films. I didn't see the appeal half the time. Like they were decent movies, but IG. English. Had a kid who would constantly question the professor's lessons. He was so sure he was right, the professor finally had to tell him he was the one with the PhD and shut up. He made that whole semester so dang cringe. My students when I taught applied statistics. Apparently millennial sophomores in chemical and biological engineering know everything and I know nothing. I was a STEM major, but I took most of the humanities and arts classes as GE or just because I was curious. I think the arts were the most pretentious. It seemed like there were more of the type who just loved to hear themselves talk. This whole thread kinda is funny because you say this about arts people, but that's exactly what they say about STEM majors. I've run into some arrogant people in my computer science courses who often say stuff like, oh that exam was easy, or doesn't matter, I'm going to get an A in this class. Listen, these are smart guys so I can believe them if they actually believe that stuff. But dang, they need to stfu. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.